Om Shanti, and welcome to Friday Night Meditations, another episode. The last few weeks, I've been discussing silence. That sounds like a bit of an oxymoron right there, discussing silence. Well, let's say reflecting upon silence, trying to understand silence. But today, let's take a different track and go with one of the companions of silence, words, and the relationship that words have to silence. Well, first of all, we mostly use our words to communicate, and to some degree, whatever that degree is, we're effective at that. Chances are that if you're like the rest of the world, that words are at best inadequate in order to express oneself. Understanding is something very different than listening to the words that people say. What is the goal of words? Well, if you think optimally, and I like to set myself standards that what is the best that can be, not necessarily the hardest or the most tiring or the most difficult, but what's the optimal of any given thing? So what is the optimal result of words? Well, what comes to my mind is happiness. That by use of my words, others experience some sort of happiness or well-being from those words. But that's a beautiful theory, isn't it? There's so many other words that come out because we don't seem to have control. Have you ever said, well, I didn't mean to say that, it just came out, or that's not how I am, that those words just came out at that moment. See, even talking about it makes me choke up. There's something to that. The result of my words should be happiness. And what allows me to speak such words is to have many, many choices available to me at any given point. Most of life is responding to the outside world, and more than anything else in relationship to one another, other human beings. We're constantly in connection with them, and we find ourselves in this tug and pull of action and reaction with one another. Someone says something to me or about me, or I hear about something, and I have a reaction. Sometimes that reaction is visceral in nature, and that's the ones that I'm really talking about. The words that come out of this visceral reaction to something. And the key to this optimal thing that I spoke of just a few moments before is that the goal of my words is to create happiness, is to create an environment where happiness can take place. Then someone can choose whether or not they want to, but it's just like the medical oath. What words are, at first, do no harm. Do no harm. And how many times in your life, well, you probably can't remember them all, but you understand what I'm talking about, that words that you let out of your mouth that you can't bring back, and it was spoken, and if you had had another chance, you wouldn't use those words again. And that's what today's lesson is about, is how to save oneself from going back to having regret, and even having to say I'm sorry, or even having to forgive anyone, by just not creating that environment in the first place, by having enough space not to react and let words just come out of your mouth. And again, that's the relationship of silence. Silence in this space between my paragraphs, conversations, this space between my sentences, there's time. There's time to understand words and check your little filing that you have, all this information you have on, just like all you have to do is ask Suri a question, and Suri can give you some type of an answer. In the same way, a stimulus comes to me, someone asks a question, really they're not criticizing me or necessarily confrontational, they're asking me a question about what is my response to this? This is how I feel, and how do you respond to it? Well, Siri has a whole backlog of information that it can come up. It doesn't think about it all the time. It just has it. Here's the key word. Let me look at what I have. Here's the best choice. So can I emulate that? Can I find a way that when I'm stimulated to give an answer, I look at my files that I have downloaded and uploaded and all types of loaded all this time and choose the one that works optimally. Choose the one that works best. But when I'm reacting, I'm not doing that. I'm simply having a gut check reaction, a knee-jerk reaction, an automatic reaction based upon who I think that I am and how I feel about this or that. Finding the space within yourself to make this choice is different. It's liberating. In order for me to find this place where my words create happiness in others, I need to have the space in my mind to identify what it is I'm getting across. And this requires the purity of intention. It requires transparency. Think of purity as being transparency. That you absolutely, like a small child, you say what it is that you want to get across, but with respect, not to infringe upon or take from others. So the key to this transparency is to keep my storehouse full. And how do I fill my storehouse? It's step number one is always going to be silence. So I can identify, number one, what I no longer need. Or even at least to question whether, if I'm still somewhat attracted or attached to a way of being, maybe I start by saying, well, let me question that a little bit. Let me try something else. You know, many people in choosing, say, a vegetarian diet say, well, let me give it a fair chance. I don't know if it's something that I want to do, but if I really want to be truly explore and take my opinion and preferences out of it, let me give myself a little time frame. Say, let me try for 3 months. And during that 3 months, let me refrain from coming to a decision, from a conclusion, and just observe the whole process, because it might take a while to get used to that. And that's just a simple thing like being a vegetarian. How about in learning to respond to others rather than react to them? It seems pretty simple, but it's not really. Let me choose the words that will help the situation. In order to choose those words, I have to find the space so then I can just share with others. Here's a problem that's come up. Let's see how we can solve it. I don't know the solution to this. So number one, I don't have to know the solution. And that frees me right away from feeling I need to be the solver. Or number two, and even more so, that I need to identify who's to blame. I don't need to identify who's to blame. All I need to do is help find a solution to any particular situation. It's really that simple. And it's just called holding back. And I can only hold back when I take the time to have space between my conversations, use that time, because life is about relationship, so it can't just be silent as a way of life. But in the space that I do have between conversations, let me think about how I want to respond to something. Going a little bit deeper, let me find the space between sentences. Let me actually listen to someone when they're talking. Think about what they're saying and why they're saying it, and what's the essence of why they're even saying it. What do they really want? And then respond as best as I can without trying to change them, without trying to solve them, but just by having the purity of intention that I want them to be happy. I want them to feel better. So let my words reflect that. And if you really take it deep, you even have space between your words. There's an infinite space between any moment and the next moment. Infinity goes way into the future. It also goes inward. You could fit millions and millions of points of light within an inch, on a needle point. So there's space goes in both ways. So words create happiness. In order for words to create happiness, let me find the transparency in my intentions. Let me tell people how I'm feeling, what I'm getting to, what I want from them. Just by being clean. Let me not depend on them. It takes silence to do all these things. Silence is where the power is. It's not the knowledge that you are lacking. It's not the knowledge that you are lacking. It's the power to implement that knowledge. You need the power. If knowledge is a sword, and it's a big sword, I need to be very strong to pick that sword up and wield it. Okay, let's just sit for a moment. Have a little silence. Maybe a little music. Just taking a few inhales and exhales to begin. Just do that. Don't get carried away trying to be perfect. Just inhale and exhale. And already I've come to a more quiet place. I recognize that there's value in silence. And I do recognize that if I really examine myself, I would like my words to cause happiness in others. So the people that I care about are happier. And when they're happier, I am also happier. I also recognize there's a latent power within me. And I want to learn to use that power in a more creative and wholesome and beneficial way for myself and others. I just have to take the time. Take the time to learn to be kind. It's such a simple thing, and it's natural if you just take the time. It doesn't matter how much I got going on in my life. That's exactly when I need it the most. Let me see the value in giving myself time to respond in more optimal ways to any situation. Feeling my latent power within, so I don't need others to behave like this or like that in order for me to find happiness. And then there's no question of me reacting and using words that I don't want to use, because the only thoughts I have are beneficial. Om Shanti. See you again next time. Be well.